Hi, I'm Diane Zahler. I'm the author of books for young readers, and my newest book is Goblin Market. It's the story of two sisters. The older goes to market and buys a piece of cursed fruit from a boy who is not what he seems, and the younger must try to find a way to save her sister by facing her own fears. I'm going to read to you from the first chapter of Goblin Market. Market day was Lizzie's favorite day of the week. Not because she loved going to the market. The few times she'd been there, she'd hated it. There were so many people she didn't know, from villages and farms clear on the other side of Elsa. So much noise, such constant comings and goings, so many smells and colors. It was overwhelming, terrifying. Each time she'd ended up hiding in a doorway at the edge of the square, trembling until Mother and Minka came to find her. Now Minka went to market on her own. Mother was delighted that Minka was old enough to go alone. She could stay home and attend to the chores. And Lizzie was delighted that she could steal into the wood for an hour or two when she was done helping Father in the fields. In the wood, Lizzie always went to the same place, a little stand of birch trees beside a trickling stream. If it was warm and the sun shone down onto the circle of grass inside the grove, she would lie and look up at the sky. She could feel the breath of the wood as the wind rustled the birch leaves. She could hear the woods chuckle and the water running over rocks. Sometimes she felt as if the wood's heart thrummed inside her body. Her own pulse matched the woods, beat for beat. If it was cold, she would wrap up in her shawl and walk to stay warm, just listening to bird songs, to the creak of branches rubbing together, to the rustle of rabbits and squirrels in the underbrush. For Lizzie, each sound was a color. When she was younger, 7 or 8, she'd sat at the kitchen table and tried to paint what she heard. But Minka laughed and pointed at her painted trees, saying, "Leaves aren't gray, silly. And those don't even look like trees. They look like sticks with clouds on top." Minka loved to paint. She did it whenever she had a few minutes free of chores, and sometimes instead of chores. She mostly used watercolors, but if she had a few extra coppers, she would go into Elsa and buy a tube of oil paint, cerulean blue or chartreuse or violet, and paint the whitewashed walls of the cottage with flowers and intricate designs, inside and out. Her lips were always tinted blue or green because she chewed on her brushes when she thought about what to paint. "We don't have any silver paint," Lizzie said. "I had to use gray." "Leaves aren't silver either," Minka pointed out. "They're green, or red and orange in the autumn." She took the paintbrush, dipped it, and in a few moments there was a tree on the paper, brown and green and almost as real as life. "But the sound the leaves make is silver," Lizzie protested. "In the springtime, anyway." Minka rolled her eyes. "What does that even mean?" she asked. "The sound the leaves make is silver?" "Well, it's the color they make when they rustle together," Lizzie said. "When the breeze blows. You know, the wavery lines of silver." Minka's face was blank. "You don't see that?" Lizzie was confused. The idea that other people didn't see what she saw was new to her. "You do see it? Actually see it?" Lizzie nodded. Minka stared at her sister. "Describe it to me, exactly." Minka put down a new sheet of paper and picked up her paints again, blending and daubing as Lizzie spoke. And when she was done, the tree was on paper, just as Lizzie saw it. She clapped her hands with joy, and Minka laughed and dabbed her on the nose with a silvery color she had somehow managed to create from the paints she had. Ever since, Lizzie had explained the colors she saw to Minka, and Minka painted what Lizzie described. Those paintings hung beside Minka's wall art in wooden frames that Father carved during the long winter nights. A bear in a cloud of deep burgundy, the color of its rumbling growl. The tea kettle whistling bright copper steam. Yellow-green rain falling on their cottage. "Such strange colors," Mother would say, shaking her head. But Father liked them. It was July and warm in the wood today, almost hot. The birch trees shaded Lizzie, and she lay for a few minutes on the wood's chest and listened to its heartbeat. A hawk flew overhead, invisible beyond the thick treetops, its high-pitched call oddly shrill in such a powerful bird. She had to close her eyes, the red vortex of its screech was so intense. As it faded, she rested quietly, watching the silver smoke sound of the rustling leaves rise amid the branches. When the sun began to sink and the air cooled a little, Lizzie stood up, brushed the grass from her skirt, and started back home. As always, she met Minka as she returned from market. When her sister saw Lizzie, she shook her head. "How do you always know I'm coming?" she asked. "Do you listen for me?" Lizzie shrugged. "I just know," she said, pulling a piece of carrot from her pocket and offering it to Cosme, the donkey. He took it with his enormous front teeth and chewed it loudly, smacking his donkey lips. The girls led him to the small thatched roof stable beside the kitchen garden and unhitched him. He tried to stick his nose in Minka's pocket, looking for more food. He was always hungry. "I sold all the bread," Minka reported, pushing the donkey away, "and the peppers and the beans. Mistress Agata had tomatoes." "That's early," Lizzie said. "Ours won't be ripe for weeks yet." She looked closely at Minka. Something seemed a little different. Her face had a light flush. Her words, too, were a little brighter than usual, the wild strawberry color from Minka's paint palette, rather than her usual rose pink. "Do you feel all right?" "I'm fine," Minka said. "Better than fine, actually." "Better than fine? What does that mean?" Minka smiled. Her eyes sparkled in a way that made Lizzie nervous. "It means we sold all the bread, of course." "And what else?" Minka almost always sold all the bread. Their bread was very good, light and crusty, with what Mistress Agata, who rarely gave a compliment, called a delicate crumb. "Minka." Mother opened the cottage door and came out to inspect the cart, wiping her hands on the towel tucked into her apron. "I see you've done quite well today, except for the squashes." There was still a small pile of yellow and green summer squashes in the cart. "Everyone has squashes," Minka said. "Too many squashes. You know how it is this time of year." Lizzie sighed. It would be squash fritters, squash pudding, pierogies stuffed with squash until autumn. Every year they ate squash until they were sick of it. Mother gathered the zucchinis in her apron and took them inside, calling, "Come and help me grate them, Lizzie." "Coming," Lizzie said, and then to Minka again, "And what else?" "Oh, nothing much," Minka replied, brushing the dust of the lane off her flounced white underskirt. "There were some new people there today, from the north." New people? Lizzie didn't much care for the old people. It was just like Minka to be pleased about new ones. They sold fruit. Some of it was gorgeous. The plums, oh, you'd have loved them. Lizzie did love plums. "Did you buy any?" Minka shook her head. "Mother said not to buy anything today, but one of them gave me a purple plum just to try, so I buy next time. I'm sorry I didn't save it for you. I just couldn't. It smelled so wonderful. I had to eat it." She closed her eyes and smiled dreamily, remembering. Lizzie frowned. It wasn't like Minka to get worked up over fruit. She liked cookies and pressed cake, pachki filled with cream, tarts and candies. The more sugar, the better. Fruit wasn't sweet enough for her. "Who gave you the plum?" she asked. Minka's eyes opened, and she blushed a deeper rose. "Oh, I don't know," she said, offhanded. Her words shimmered. "Just a boy." "A boy?" Minka took a deep breath. "Yes, a boy," she said, all in a rush. "The handsomest boy you've ever seen. Beautiful almost, and nice, and funny." Lizzie was silent, but Minka couldn't stop. Her words tumbled out like water released from a dam. "He gave me the plum because he said he didn't have any peaches, but my skin was like a peach, and a plum was the next best thing, and when I ate it, oh, it was delicious. I never tasted anything like it, and the juice ran all down my chin. It was so embarrassing. But he had a fine linen handkerchief, and he wiped it away, and then, when I was done, he took the pit and dug a little hole in the ground and put it in, and he said a plum tree would grow there, and we would always know exactly where we had first met." Lizzie blinked. Minka had never talked about a boy this way before. Of course, all the boys they knew, Jacob and Stefan and Jacek and Eric, were like brothers. They'd grown up with them, seen their runny noses and their scab picking, seen Jacob wetting his pants when he was 5. Minka would never sound dreamy about any of them. "Plums are purple," Lizzie said. "So he was saying you have purple skin." "Oh, Lizzie, stop. It was the next best thing. He said I was like a peach." This was almost as strange to Lizzie. A peach was orange, and Minka's skin was a translucent ivory pink, and peaches were fuzzy. Minka's face was as smooth as glass. And you've stained your blouse, Lizzie noted. Minka looked down at her blouse and the dark stain across the front. It was the plum juice, she said, but I know you can get it out. You always do. Laundry was Lizzie's chore. She'd never admit it, but she loved doing it. The rhythm of scrubbing, the precision of folding, the challenge of getting every shirt and skirt and kerchief perfectly clean. She was extremely good at it, and she knew it. But she wouldn't let Minka's compliment distract her. What is Plum Boy's name? She pressed. Minka smiled. Emil, she said. His name is Emil. Isn't that a lovely name? Elzbieta, Mother called through the open window to Lizzie. Come in right now. When Mother used Lizzie's whole name, she meant business. Not a word to Mother and Father about Emil, Minka said urgently. Do you promise? Lizzie gave her a skeptical look, but it was Minka asking. All right, I promise, she said. Then she added, You'd better put the card away and feed Cosme. Emil. It was an ordinary name, a stupid name. It sounded greenish-brown to her, even though when Minka said it, it had a cherry pink hue. Emil. Minka had met a boy.